Okay, we're live. Hi, everybody. Steve Sabludowsky, BuyUBuzz.com, and I'm here talking with Lawrence Chehardy. And we're going to talk about the Louisiana legislative session 2015. Lawrence, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Now, we're 3 weeks into, if I'm not mistaken, 2 or 3 weeks into the session. I think it's 3 weeks. And I'm just wondering, what's your impression so far?
Well, it appears that the members of the legislature right now are really struggling to figure out what to do about the state's budget deficit. The state has been running a severe deficit for several years now, and through a series of patchworks, the governor and the legislature have managed to balance the budget. But the big problem has been is that every year the legislature keeps coming back to find a state government that basically is broke and struggling to make ends meet. We're not on a sound fiscal path, and things are not going well inside the legislature, and with regard to funding state government and local government too, because local government does provide, it does rely on state government for some funding.
Right, right. And you were the assessor for Jefferson Parish for quite a while. How is that office funded?
That office is funded by the legislature, which sets the budget for the assessor's office. So the legislature will fix the budget, and then those monies come from local sources. So none of the assessor's money comes from the state itself. It comes off of the local property taxes that are paid. So again, I don't know what the budget of the office is today, but let's say it was $3.5 million. Then $3.5 million would come off the top of the property tax collections for each of the taxing districts to support the assessor's office.
Okay, and the reason why I ask that is because one of the plans that are being discussed is to do away with the inventory tax, or to do away with the inventory tax credit. I'm just wondering whether or not offices like the Jefferson Parish Assessor's office would be impacted by, should there be any change in the inventory tax or the tax credit?
Well, the Jefferson Parish Assessor's office would not be impacted because of the way that it's funded. There are, however, several assessor's offices who do have a local millage. And so if the inventory tax is repealed, that is, inventories become tax exempt in Louisiana, then those offices, like all the other districts, the recreation, parks, playgrounds, fire departments, local sheriff's offices, those assessors' offices would lose whatever revenues they were getting off of the inventory tax. They would lose that if inventories in Louisiana are no longer taxed.
Okay, so is it fair to say, though, since it's locally funded, is it fair to say that if the money's not there via the inventory tax, then wouldn't the local governments perhaps make a decision as to how they want to allocate funds, or is it just locked in by the legislature?
Well, the millage rates are set by local voters for the most part. There are 1 or 2 exceptions. They're called constitutional millages, and they're fixed in the state constitution. But the bulk of the millage, the bulk of the taxes that local taxpayers pay in property taxes are all local funds, local taxes that go to the local district depending on where you live. The repeal of the inventory tax just in and of itself would result in a huge loss of revenue for local government throughout the state. For example, in Jefferson Parish, it's probably in the neighborhood of $35 million, maybe $40 million. We're not one of the worst, though. There are some parishes in the state where they would literally have to double their millage in order to collect the same revenue that they were getting from the inventory tax. Now, that's the exception, not the rule. Most folks are not quite that bad, but there are so many ramifications to the repeal of the inventory tax with regard to local government that the legislature needs to be very, very careful that they fully understand what they're doing. Because, For example, when local government comes to you and says, we want to improve streets, we want to have a $50 million bond issue, sell bonds so that we can repair streets. Well, people in the community say, that's great, let's do it. Well, when you do that, if you take the inventory tax out of the picture, then you end up with a situation where, number one, it's obviously going to cost everybody else a lot more money to improve the roads than if you had that inventory tax. The big problem is with existing bond millage. Those millages were levied with the inventory tax as part of the bonding capacity of local government. When you take that out, what is going to happen? Well, first off, millages are going to have to go up to satisfy those bonds, to pay off those bonds. I mean, obviously, you've got to pay them off. So taxes will go off from that. And it's a question of, would the bond houses that purchase these bonds want local government to put up additional pledges because of losing those that inventory tax? So it has a lot of ramifications to do it. Don't know whether the legislature is going to do it or not. The big problem the legislature has is that when they provided for the credit on a state level, for example, if you paid $1,000 in inventory tax to local government, you could get a $1,000 tax credit against whatever you owed the state of Louisiana. Well, the credit was one thing, but it's a refundable credit, which means if you only owed the state $800, you wouldn't pay the $800, and you would get a $200 check from the state. So you actually would make money. So I suspect the legislature is going to look at some combination possibly of maybe doing away with the refundable part. And that would, I'm certain, would save the state some money also.
Right, but of course the business community, particularly lobby, is definitely against that. They consider that to be a tax increase. Well,
they do, and certainly it's a statutory scheme. The taxing of inventory is part of the Constitution, just like the taxing on your home or your business, real estate you may own. Taxing that is part of the state constitution. The legislature, with the urging of lobby many years ago, established this credit to where businesses that pay an inventory tax could go ahead and apply for this credit against whatever taxes they owe to the state. So it's been something that they benefited from for a very long time, and I'm sure those big refineries up and down the river have done very well because of it, as well as a lot of any other businesses that rely on inventories. They've made out very well. Now that the state can't afford it, and that's the reason we have the problem, because the state's in such a bad fiscal position. Basically, what the state's done is provided all these tax exemptions for business, which has been great, except that you got to have the revenue to offset the taxes that you're giving away, and the state doesn't have that anymore. Right. Now, the governor's saying that that is corporate welfare. I mean, last year of his term, last legislative session, and all of a sudden he realized that's corporate welfare. Doesn't that seem sort of disingenuous? It does to me. Yeah, none of this is like business hiring fancy lawyers to go find loopholes. All of these statutes, all these laws, all these tax breaks that these businesses have been getting. And remember this, most of the benefit of these exemptions and tax credits, the real beneficiaries are the much bigger businesses. That's not to say that if you don't own a little family hardware store that you're not benefiting, because you are. But it's really the big boys that are getting the big dollars, and that's what you have to remember. But this statutory scheme was passed by the legislature. There's nothing immoral about it, but it was passed by the legislature years ago, and so businesses are taking advantage of it. So if the governor is right in its corporate welfare, it's corporate welfare created by the state of Louisiana, by past governors and past legislatures, and including this governor. And this legislature. Sure. Yeah. So right now, could you give us an overview in terms of your appreciation of the plans that are in place to try to
fix this budget, $1.6 billion budget shortfall, and your understanding in terms of where we are in trying to fix it.
Well, it's my understanding that what the legislature is doing, that there have been a number of bills that were introduced dealing with all of these numerous tax credits that businesses have been able to take advantage of. And what they're planning on doing is going through all of those to try to see which ones they can possibly pass that would provide the money necessary to help balance the budget. Now, that's not to say that there's not going to be more cuts. There probably will be. But what they're trying to do is to come up with revenue so that whatever cuts are left are have a much smaller impact on the budget. With regard to the inventory tax, I do think that if the legislature passes that, either the repeal of the tax credit or repealing the tax altogether, they need to really, as I said earlier, really need to understand the full ramifications of what they're doing. And we went through that just a few moments ago. But it's a big deal, repealing it, and they need to understand that. The simplest thing for them to do, and I don't have at my fingertips what the revenue would be, but assuming that it is a relatively significant number, if they did away with the refundable portion of the credit, that would certainly save the state some money. So that, for example, if you paid $1,000 in local property taxes, you owe the state $800. You'd be able to, you would get the benefit of what you paid locally, but only to the extent that you owe the state money. So let's reverse it. If you owe the state $1,000, but you only paid $800, you only get the $800. You don't get the extra $200 rather. You don't get a refund check from the state for something that you don't owe the state money for.
Right. Now, I've heard and I've read, I should say, that that inventory tax credit, assuming that they decide to go that route, that the money would not be available. This is, I think, from the legislative auditor. The money would not even be available for this budget year. So,
well, yeah, if they were to go, for example, if you repeal the inventory tax, just repeal the tax altogether. In other words, there's no more inventory tax. We don't tax inventories in Louisiana. It goes on the ballot in October. By law, the local assessors must turn their tax rolls over to the state by November 15th of that year. So as a practical matter, if it were to be put on the ballot, it would go on the ballot in the end of October, around October 20th or 24th, whatever the governor's race election date is. I think it might be the 24th, but it's the 20th or 24th of October. Go on the ballot. Then the results have to be promulgated. That takes a little bit, not a lot of time, but it takes time. There's not going to be enough time for the assessor to prepare his tax roll and meet the mandate of having the roll done to give the local sheriff the opportunity to mail out tax bills and have you and I pay our taxes before the end of the year. So it's a physical problem. So it's not going to be any help for this half for 2015. It would take effect then for 2016. What I'm assuming what would benefit the state was if they either did away with the credit altogether, which means the state doesn't have to dole out the money, the refund back to the businesses and that sort of thing. But those are things that, again, legislators come up with ideas of legislation that they think sounds good, but sometimes they're not thought through. Sometimes they don't talk to the people who deal with those issues, and they don't realize that it sounds like a nice idea, but when you put it into effect, it doesn't work out that way. Or getting the benefits of it are going to be down the road. The benefits are not going to be today. It's going to be down the road.
Right. Well, this is something that the legislature certainly is looking at, and obviously those people who are impacted need to educate the legislators. So that solution is problematic. And then you have the film tax credit.
Right.
That's something that there is some question as to whether or not they're going to adjust it to lop off maybe $100 million over the next year or two. There's some other tax credits, exemptions, exclusions. I'm just wondering, do you have a feel for what might be on the hit list?
Well, I think all those things are on the hit list. Now, you've got to be careful because, for example, the film credit, what my understanding is that they're going through the program and they want to make sure that the state is getting the benefit of whatever refunds or whatever credits are being given, so that there are no little nuances here or there that might allow some of the work to be done somewhere else, but it's allowed. But we really don't want it done somewhere else. We want it all done here. So they're going through and maybe, closing some of those little technicalities to try to tighten it up. And that certainly will save the state some money there. But, Louisiana's become very, very competitive now with Hollywood and other parts of the country in producing and having films and television series. For example, NCIS New Orleans is filmed right here in New Orleans. And so it's been good for the city. If you watch that show, and I don't know if you've ever seen it, but
No,
if you
I have
watch
not
that
actually.
show, it's actually, my wife and I enjoy watching it. You know why? We get to
Because you get to see the scene.
it's
Sure,
a beautiful, the city looks fantastic. And it's filmed not only in New Orleans, it's also filmed in parts of it in Jefferson Parish, and it's also filmed in other parts of South Louisiana. So it travels around. It showcases this region. It showcases this state, and that's got to be worth some money also. So
Sure.
You've got to be careful. And look, if you do away with it, do all those jobs go away? What about companies that have come here and invested in an infrastructure that they see this going on, where they're now concerned, well, maybe Louisiana's going to do away with these credits, and they pick up and they don't do those investments now. They move on and go somewhere else to do that investment. So it does have a ripple effect, but certainly we want the program and whatever benefits the state's given, we want to make sure those benefits obviously are directly benefiting Louisiana. We don't want to give tax credits to someone to benefit California.
Sure. And speaking of California, I communicated just today with someone who told me that Hollywood, California actually is, they've gotten into the tax incentive game too. And so Louisiana, which is number one in filmmaking in the world, as I understand it at this point in time, we're now going to be competing against Hollywood because of at least more so because they're now into the tax incentive contests. And
Well,
so, yeah.
It's my understanding that the individual who heads up the California's program for movies and for filming said that Louisiana was the #1 competition for California when it comes to movies and television programs and broadcast,
Sure.
filming the film. So let me tell you, that's a great honor. I mean, look, all the things we read about Louisiana and all these lists that we're on, that the states are ranked on, and unfortunately, so many of them, Louisiana is at the wrong end of the list. Here's a scenario in which Louisiana is where Hollywood is saying, "You're our competitor." That's great. That's wonderful. We want that. So yeah, California has been working on, and by now may have actually gone in and increased some of their incentive programs to keep some of those productions in California.
Right. And so that could be another, compelling reasons not to mess around with, say, the inventory tax or the credit, compelling reasons not to really tamper with the film tax credit, except for maybe really, say, obnoxious funding for certain producers or something like that. Who are using, say, the money to film in other areas, and not Louisiana. But each one of these so-called fixes have some real problems. The tobacco tax, that's another area that they're looking at. And to me, that's a very convoluted way of raising revenues. I'm talking about the tobacco tax that is going to be where the money would be allocated to for education, because our governor is can't raise say taxes elsewhere, but can do it through a circuitous manner. Could you maybe, that's just my opinion, but I think it's also the opinion of so many other people too. You've been keeping up with that, haven't you, in terms of the tobacco tax?
Yeah, I mean, what they're talking about doing is raising the tobacco tax. There was a bill in the legislature to raise Louisiana's tobacco tax on cigarettes to the national highest rate in the country, the national average in the country. There was a bill that came out of I believe House Ways and Means that has it at a much lower level, but still an increase in the amount of what the tax will be, a significant increase for a pack of cigarettes, for example. You know, I've always thought it was kind of a bizarre way to raise money, because we don't want people smoking because it's not healthy for you. Certainly raising the tax may make some people stop smoking or possibly maybe slow down, although I suspect that, you know, nicotine's a powerful addiction, and there are so many people that have tried to quit smoking and they just can't. But, you know, taking that money and say putting it on education, it's great for funding education, but you would like to think that maybe we could take that money and use it for healthcare, to use those funds to help people, you know, particularly those people who have been smoking and ultimately have health issues because of it. But it's always been one of the few taxes that the public says, well, we don't care if you raise taxes on cigarettes.
Well, the governor did care in terms of, I mean, he wouldn't even extend the 4 pennies, I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And so now we're in the real hole, and we're looking at raising it. But you know, the money would be going, this is really odd, the tuition would increase, as I appreciate it. And yeah, go ahead.
We're talking about the TOPS program and
No, I'm talking about tuition. The tuition would increase, as I appreciate it. The state could possibly give the schools greater leverage to raise tuition. So the tuition would increase, and as I appreciate it, there would be a tax credit that the parents would get at the end of the year or for the next tax year that would help pay for that tuition. And the money would be raised by the tobacco tax.
Well,
no, I'm serious.
I understand, you know, but we're in this cycle right now where we take money away from you over here, and then next year we let you get the money back, and then we take it away over here, and then we let you get it back there. You know, how does that help? How does that help the state with its fiscal problems? I mean, in other words, if I say to you, you've got to give me $100, and you say, well, you know, I don't want to give you $100. Well, look, give me $100, and then next month I'll give you back $100. And then next year you give me $100, and I give you back $100. Well, neither one of us is any better off or worse off or what have you. We just got this $100 that's floating around. It's money that the state certainly can't use to do anything with except give it back to you. Although, you know, if they give it back as a tax credit, then the state won't have the money at all. If they give it back as a tax deduction, you'll only get a small piece of it back as a benefit, depending on what your tax bracket is. And you know, at the state, the highest bracket's 8%. So even if they were going to levy an 8% tax on income and you were in that bracket, you know, if it was $1,000, what would you get back? $80. So it really wouldn't be any benefit on a tax deduction. Obviously, on a tax credit, it would be a big deal because it'd be the full $1,000. We've got to get away from smoke and mirrors. You know, we've got to figure out a way to run the state in a way that people understand that, it's going to cost $1,000 is what it costs, and people are going to have confidence in government that it's going to be run correctly. And of course, that's the big problem. The vast majority of people think government wastes their money. And I'm going to tell you, that's not an argument I want to get into, because I've got to side with them. There's a lot of waste in government. I think one of the things you're going to see, and I don't think it's going to happen until after this year's governor's race, is an effort to be made early next year to try to go into the state constitution and undedicate a lot of these funds where monies flow in, and the legislature nor the governor can go in and touch those funds. So when you have an issue where you have to make some cuts, instead of having only higher education and healthcare as really the only two big places you can cut, so that's got to take the brunt of it. You'll have the ability to cut more across the board. Now, that's not going to fly well with the various constituencies who benefit from those funds. They're not going to want that, and I understand that. But the next governor is going to have to deal with it. And I suspect whatever comes out the legislature this year is going to basically be a Band-Aid approach. It's not going to be fully solved for the future in this legislative session. It's going to take a lot more work and probably a new governor who's going to have to come in and deal with it. If not, we're going to be doing the same thing again next year, and the year after, and the year after that.
Well, the problem is that we kicked the can down too many times and too far down the road, and as a result of that, there aren't the can's running down there, and we're running out of roads, and so now we're bleeding. We're bleeding because we're looking at revenue sources. The governor doesn't want to raise tax. I understand that. He's running for president, and he's limited the opportunities to raise revenues. Those areas that he's saying, okay, well, let's raise revenues. There's a kickback from those people who like lobby, who would perhaps be an ally of the governor's. So it's an absolute nightmare. My last question to you is this: we have an election coming up, governor's race, lieutenant governor, every House, Senate seat for state and other seats. Given what has happened, I'm just wondering, do you have a feel for, or do you think Democrats might make a comeback of sorts? Obviously they dominated state government, but look what's happened over the last 8 years. I'm not saying it's the Republicans' fault, but the Stelly had brought some money into the state government. We've provided incentives all over the place. In fact, one of my pieces of legislation that I came up with, the idea that I came up with 10 years ago, was the digital media tax credit. Obviously, that is on the hook, and that should be on the hook also. So I'm just wondering, are the Democrats, do they now have an opportunity to come back and maybe make some gains up, given the fact that the state has been run by the Republicans for the last 3 years, that granted Governor Jindal all this leeway. They haven't put his feet to the fire. And I'm just wondering, there'll be an emotional impact in whether the Republican Party could be the losers. Well,
number one, I do think under any scenario, it's going to be very difficult for a Democrat to win statewide office. I mean, it's just not there. I think it's going to be very difficult. Now, that said, if the Democratic Party has the right messenger and wants to couch this election not in terms of, we'll say, Republican Democrat, but it's basically saying, look what Bobby Jindal has done. Look where he has taken us. He has refused to provide the fiscal leadership or leadership at all as to where the state ought to be going. If you want to continue down that road, vote for one of my opponents. They're cut from the same cloth.
Well, should, you know,
But
that's
I'm not.
yeah.
You know, I'm not. This is what I will do. This is what we need to do. We can't continue to fool ourselves. We can't promise, you know, a Washington special interest group, we're never going to raise taxes. We're never going to do this. We're never going to do that. And in the meantime, higher education in Louisiana has suffered tremendously. LSU is suffering. UNO is suffering. You know, we've got to address these issues, and we've got to find the way to fund them so that we can have an excellent higher education system in Louisiana, as well as secondary and elementary education for that matter. We have to have health care for people. You know, we've got these new hospitals that are going to open up in downtown New Orleans. Is the money there is the money going to be there to open the doors? Right now, that's questionable.
Right.
It's questionable. We're going to have these big old buildings sitting there and 5, 6, 7 floors, and maybe 2 floors will be open because that's all the money there is. It's for 2 floors. This is outrageous of where we are. What you're saying is kind of the message that I think Mitch Landrieu could have run with. Now we know Mitch is not running for governor. He's made that announcement, and it wasn't a great surprise, but he made it official that he's not running. But it's an argument he could have made very, very well. That look, voters, Louisiana's in a bad way, and we've tried, you know, giving the store away, giving everything away, all these tax credits, all these tax breaks, all this, and look where we are. We're broke. We're broke. We don't have any money. You know, if we keep down this road, there will be no LSU. There will be no higher education in Louisiana. You know, all of our kids are going to have to go somewhere else because we won't have the money to fund it. So, you know, you make it a real contrast. But in order to do that, you've got to have the right messenger. And right now, that's yet to be seen because the Democrat in the race, Representative John Bell Edwards, nobody knows him. Nobody knows anything about him. Maybe the people in his, I'm sure people in his representative district know him, and people in Tangipahoa Whole Parish know him. But once you leave there, he's not known,
Right.
not known at all. And in the public opinion polls, I think the reason he's getting the vote he's getting is because when they ask the question, who would you vote for? It's Republican, 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 Democrat. Well, if you're a Democratic voter, you have a tendency to just say, well, whoever the Democrat is. And if you're a Republican voter, unless you specifically know, you're going to say the names of one of the Republicans. Just natural human, the way people react to those questions. So you got to have the right messenger. And right now that's yet to be seen. But I do think you do have a valid point. It's something I've said, that if the argument can be made properly, that could make people stop and think one more time before they go in that booth and decide who to vote for.
I really think that's a viable argument, but the messenger that you're talking about, I totally agree. The flip side of that is I think there is a messenger that actually is generating that argument, and that's the governor himself. You know, he's not here. He doesn't care. I mean, and so right there, there's there's anger that is that's obvious. You can cut it. And so as bad as things go, assuming they do go bad, and I just don't know how we're going to get out of this mess, he's going to get the blame, and the Republicans could very well get the blame because they didn't put his feet to the fire. They have control over him more than he has control over them.
Well, I don't know if I'll agree with that. I mean,
that's the argument. That's the argument I think that is going to be made. Yeah. And I think that unless Republicans really begin to, I mean, they had a chance with Medicaid expansion this past week. You know, I'm not saying that that's a great idea. I am saying that's a way to make up some of the shortfall. They need to match the federal money, you know, for health care in some way. So that's out at this point. That's out the way. So to me, it's just a real mess.
Well, I think what's going to have to happen, and you're seeing a little bit of it right now. There is some pushback in the legislature to where the governor's at. I do think legislators, look, there's 105 members in the House and 39 members in the Senate. The legislators do look to the governor and not just this governor, to every governor, to provide leadership. And I think that's rightfully so, because the governor's in charge with running the state. So even though you're the board of directors, which is basically what the legislature is, a board of directors, you're looking at the head guy who runs the day-to-day business of the company to tell you, okay, well, what do we need to do? You know, do we need to change our product? Do we need to raise our prices? Do we change our product? What do we do? What do we do to sell more of our product? Well, in this case, governor, you run the state. Your people are appointed to run higher education. Your folks are running the healthcare system. Your folks are running the highway system in the state. Tell us, what do we need? Well, they feel like they're not getting that. And I do think what you're going to see is some real pushback. Now, the problem's going to be is that at the end of the day, you know, to pass some of these, if you want to repeal a tax that's in the Constitution, for example, the inventory tax, it's going to take a 2/3 vote of both houses. The governor should be able to stop it from getting 2/3 vote if he wanted to. I mean, because again, to pass it in the House of Representatives, you need a 2/3 vote. You know, you need 70 votes to pass it. You only need 36 votes to kill it. And of course, 36 is a much easier number to get to than 70 is. So the governor still has some stroke and some power, but I do think that the legislature is going to need to move forward on its own. It's not going to get the direction from the governor's office that would be helpful. And this idea, well, you can do what you want. If you raise this tax, that's fine, but you got to offset it somewhere else. Well, you know, you put $100 here and you reduce $100 there.
You're even.
You're even. You haven't gone anywhere. You haven't gone anywhere. So what does that do? You know, I never understood that. I'm just assuming I'm missing something because it just doesn't make sense to me. But I think the legislature has got to just take the bull by the horns and move forward and do what they believe needs to be done to get the best budget that they can get out during this legislative session. And then send it to the governor and see what he does. If he vetoes it, then, you know, that's going to send a message. If he goes and signs it, then it's going to look like, you know, the legislature took over. And that's what we need to do. That's what we need to see happen. I think that's what we need to watch for. And I think the folks watching this video, that's what you want to look for. You want to see whether or not the legislature just moves forward on its own to create a state budget, to get the state back on its level field, so that come the election of the next governor, it can come back and probably in a special session and take a look at everything and make some broader changes that might need to be made to get the state in better shape.